with India's broadcast media snapping from its moral, ethical, and professional bearings and careening through the country's national discourse and destroying anything in its way, Bharat FM is pleased to feature the well known journalist, critically acclaimed author, and a long standing observer of the media, Amrita Shah. Amrita has been a journalist with a career spanning over 3 decades, reporting a wide diversity of hard news stories for leading newspapers and publications in India and around the world, including for Time magazine. She was also the founding editor of Elle India. She has authored 5 books so far, including Balancing India's Human Resources, The Fine Line Between Success and Failure, 1996, Hypocrisy and Television in Urban India, 1997, Vikram Sarabhai, A Life, 2007, the highly critically acclaimed Ahmedabad, A City in the World, 2016, and Telly-Guillotined, How Television Changed India, 2019. Telly-Guillotined builds on her 1997 book, Hype, Hypocrisy and Television into the Present, broad in scope, cricket mania, media guerrillas, zombie kids, brand deluge, primetime warfare. It shows processes triggered by India's economic reorientation, shaping media and politics today. Here is Amrita Shah. Hriday? Okay. Welcome to Bharat FM, Amrita. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Yep, great to be here.
Lest you think that the background that you see is my home and I've suddenly come into some enormous wealth of my career, I wanted you to know that this is a completely fake background provided by StreamYard.
Oh dear, I was about to come visit, Mayank.
Oh, it is mine. Okay. Joke aside, you've been a long-standing observer and critic of the Indian media, particularly Indian broadcast media. Give us a broad overview of what you think is going on right now.
Right now?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's the culmination of a process that started with liberalization, or just a little before liberalization. And to some extent, it's part of a global phenomenon where you had a technological revolution. You had a sort of explosion in the kind of electronic media. So you had suddenly the kind of emergence of video. Then you had cable television, satellite television, dish antenna sprouting, and then the various ways in which various countries kind of made use of it. So you had that on the one hand. You also had a shift in economic thinking in the 80s with Reagan and with Thatcher. And so you had a kind of shift towards sort of what we are now calling neoliberal ideology, where kind of profit maximization and the idea that the market will take care of all human needs, that kind of came into prominence around that time. And associated with that, you had the rise of Rupert Murdoch,
Right,
who became the face of a media revolution of two kinds, according to me. One is a sort of centralization of ownership, where he owned tremendous amount of media across the world. And this is really important because, first of all, so that's a global, you kind of have one person. You can go across the world owning media. The other thing is even within countries, in America, for instance, you used to have laws where you could not, you were trying to prevent monopoly of media. And all that changed. And Rupert Murdoch suddenly owned media everywhere. And to some extent, he kind of he helped usher in a lot of technology and a lot of changes in the way media functioned in the managerial way. But what he also did was alter the idea of what journalism was all about, what the media's purpose, the news media I'm now talking about. Its purpose became increasingly under him an idea of how do you maximize profit? I mean, he was, in keeping with the kind of economic thinking that of his time. And this was brought, now let me come to India, and where you see in India, all these things happened. At the same time, we had liberalization. So you have already the ground being prepared. We already in the mid-80s, we have television being taken across the country. You have a transmitter a day. That was the kind of rush with which television was being spread across the country. And this was a political move, but it was also linked to the coming economy because the policy was going to be changing. We were going to kind of move from socialism to a more open free market. And so you needed something to push consumption. And so the media was, if you remember in the late 80s, I mean, from the mid 80s onwards, actually, you had a lot of freeing of controls. You could suddenly import television sets, you could bring in video VCRs, cable TV operators. What they were doing was actually completely illegal. They were laying wires across, from house to house. And nothing was being done about it because it was all a kind of actually part, in a sense, of policy. You also had, I mean, television autonomy came slowly, and that, I could come to a little later, but you also had, I'm trying to recall, but anyway, this was a kind of surge you had in the mid 80s. And, oh, sorry, yes, very important. The introduction of color television at the time of the Asiad in India in 1982. So, as you can see, we were already moving towards something. And in the early 90s, you then have dish antenna coming in a big way. You have satellite television with the Gulf War. All these things are happening. So, on one side, technology, on the other side, a kind of changing economic policy in the country. And then you have the Murdochian idea of profit maximization in the media taking hold within newspaper offices in India. And across the board, I mean, slowly you start seeing, newspaper after newspaper doing things that is not actually theorized in a sense, right? It just seems to be happening one after the other. But suddenly you have a lot of different kinds of coverage. You have a lot of social life, parties, a new kind of lifestyle that is coming into newspapers. And as I said, when I say this now, I can say it now looking back. But at that time, when I was saying it, it was not taken. My words would have made no sense. But now, when you look back, you can see the trajectory that advertising was having a great deal of influence in how the media was shaping up, how journalism was shaping up.
True.
And so, if you want to interrupt me right now, because I can just.
No, I don't. I'm letting you finish your thought. That's okay. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So you had, as I said, the start of this changing format of news. Now, there are two things that happened. One is a very straightforward thing, which is, as journalists, we are aware, or at least of a certain generation, we are aware of the barrier between, a kind of sacrosanct barrier between editorial and marketing. And that, I'm not saying that it was ever kind of always in practice, it reached the ideal. But everyone knew there was this barrier and everyone knew what good practice was. That was breached. That's the first and obvious. You start seeing advertisers start pushing editorial. You start having things called advertorials, and slowly you kind of have greater and greater pressure to, push products, to push companies. That's, to me, straightforward corruption. But that's a very straightforward effect, and you can kind of try and find out how much and how of it took place. But that, is not, I think, the really interesting or the really kind of important thing to look at. What happened really is that you had a complete shift in what the news media's purpose was. Just before I come to that, let me just say that in between there was another sort of technological revolution, which was television. You suddenly had, news television in India. Autonomous news was allowed on television, which was a shift from before. And so for a while, I think in the early 2000s, a lot of people felt they were seeing again this sort of surge or the emergence of something new. But I really don't think it's part of a cycle. The technology brings to the fore some possibility, and then again it's sort of controlled. It's a kind of cyclical thing, which doesn't mean I'm saying that there'll be a surge again of autonomy. I think that surge is a mirage. It happens and you can get fooled by it. But what happened really was that you saw the effects of advertising on the way news was done. In the sense that what were your priorities? Earlier it was the citizen. And who was the citizen? It was everyone, from the poorest to the richest, in an ideal sense. But what you started seeing was a shift from that idea of the citizen as a reader to the consumer as the reader. So you see the poor disappearing. I lived in Bombay in like the early 90s. I can tell you, for instance, that politics disappeared from the newspapers. I'm talking about local politics, done in a kind of, serious way. It almost disappeared. You started seeing gossip of a certain kind, but you did not see an actual analysis of politics. You did not see news about the poor. Increasingly, they went, and informally, one can see from whatever memos and things one heard of in newspaper offices, it was actually a move to hire younger people, not only to hire younger, but younger columnists, younger. It was as if the old were kind of to be thrust out. A leading newspaper even sent a memo saying there should be smiles and positivity on the front page. So, why is all this happening? It's happening because the amount of advertising surged 25 times between 1976 and 1994. And over that period, now it's become a 75,000 crore industry. So you have to just sort of understand the power of the advertiser. And the advertiser wants a comfortable space where his or her products can be seen and people are in a positive and happy frame of mind. So if you see across the last 20 years, you see the media across the last 20 or 30 years, glamour, fashion. I'm not against having glamour and fashion in the media. I'm just saying look at the amount of it.
Right.
Look at the stock market. If I'm not mistaken, I think some 2% or maybe it's a little more, but it's a really minuscule number of people in India who invest in the stock market. Yet every business, you have so many channels with tickers running the stock market rates, etc. So a kind of distortion has taken place, a huge distortion. And from that comes the idea that you do anything for profit, you do anything for money. It's become ingrained, it's not as if journalists sat down one day and said, now we will shift. It's a slow process. The costs mount, your competition increases, you don't even think about what you're doing. And so then you go on in this wing where you've lost your purpose in a sense, So I think that's what has happened to kind of try and make it as good as I can.
No, in fact, with that, we should end the interview because you answered all questions.
I was afraid of that.
No, I'm kidding. Two themes jumped out at me from what you just said. One is, of course, the rise in India of Rupert Murdochian kind of thinking in the media, coupled with, I'm sure you remember, satellite television Asian region, which was the full form for the acronym STAR TV.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and when Star TV came, I remember there was a pretty raging debate in India in the 80s about how much autonomy to give to Doordarshan, etc. And suddenly this technology comes, intervenes, and completely destroys that debate. Because Star TV came and started beaming from Hong Kong and settled the debate. So now that's done. We already are in the midst of a massive technological revolution.
Right. No, I would clarify that. Sorry, just to interrupt, because it didn't exactly. There was something in between that happened, where the government was giving out licenses for, like they were allowing private producers for producing content for the metro channels.
Right.
They kept a very steep license fee. It was not thought out at all. So you had really lowest common denominator entertainment for no reason, just because it was not thought out. So I'm just saying, with technology, there was also this kind of confusion about how to deal with this.
Right.
That could have helped if there was a little more clarity at that point.
Right. So pre-Star days, the broadcast media meant Doordarshan and the print, basically.
Well, you had BBC, you had CNN,
Yeah,
you had actually the early form of Star. I mean, uh,
but
uh, so you had a few channels. I think you also had Aaj Tak. So it wasn't straight off. There
yeah,
was in
kind
between.
of broad entertainment that we see now. We basically had print on the one side and bit of Doordarshan and a couple of others that you mentioned. And then comes Star, and completely the whole landscape began to change. Is that the right way to look at it?
No, 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 no. You had Z before that. Z was the big change, in terms of the entertainment part of it.
Okay.
So that was a big. I don't actually think Star was huge, so it was of course a big kind of. And what then its soaps became very influential,
Right.
but it wasn't like as if the landscape was open and Star came.
Yeah.
There were quite a bit. I think Z was very influential.
Right. The point I was trying to make was the Indian media at that stage even remotely aware of what was coming their way? Technologically, in terms of profit thinking?
I think the profit part of it came in through the newspapers, not through television initially. So I think that kind of thinking we were already slowly beginning to shift by the late 80s and the early 90s.
Mhm.
This idea that news is just another business, that there is no, I mean, you don't talk about the public purpose, you don't talk about anything wider. It's just another business, it's just another way to make money. So that was very Murdochian thinking, I would say. That was the sort of influence. Um, Television, it didn't. I mean, I think initially news television. You see, there was entertainment, which was a huge kind of industry and influence change maker in its own way, extremely big. And we can talk about that separately if you want.
Sure.
Star was very influential there, certainly. But I think news, I think initially it wasn't seen as that. It was seen as an exciting, because we went from not having free television to having free television, right? So there was this idea that we were now going to investigate and do great stories and be wonderful for journalism. Just before that, we had those little experiments with video television, which was seen as a great way to, kind of go around the monopoly of the government. So it was not. No, I mean, I don't think they saw what was coming at all, and I think they still don't understand what happened.
That's rather striking that even now, after so much, they still don't have a clue.
Because I think what tends to happen is when you're inside things, you really don't see it mounting. And I found it very hard for me to communicate what I see, my arguments, because it's almost as if no, no, no. You can only see what happened yesterday.
Right. Right. This transition of media companies from being sort of mission center to profit center, that has already happened in many ways. Do you think there's any possibility that the reverse might happen with people getting increasingly antsy about what's going on? The kind of, even I find those who were absolutely strident supporters of, say, a figure like Arnab Goswami have begun
Mhm.
to realize that this is just a bit too much.
Yeah, but I don't see any good ideas coming up right now. There is a thinking now that the media has gone too far, as you just sort of suggested, say an Arnab, for instance, or that's what people feel, that the media has gone too far and must be reined in. To me, this is absurd in a way, because it has gone too far, but it didn't go too far alone. It went too far because we, the kind of consumers in a sense, have approved of the economic shift, we have not, the advertiser has been completely party to this decline. And that is not being recognized. So unless we understand how we got here, all we are going to do is, in a way, punish for instance, the media, and I'm not saying it doesn't deserve punishment, but but basically what you're doing is now you're completely destroying that institution of the free press or the free media.
Right.
So I don't think any of these are actual solutions. They're just now, the last bit of now come in for the kill.
Right.
So I don't think these are solutions, and maybe that, but I don't see a solution in the current scenario. I really don't. The only solution, I mean, I see a solution in people becoming aware. Already, for instance, we have citizen journalism, right? I mean, we've already broken those barriers that only vetted journalists can report news. I mean, now we have news coming in through social media and WhatsApp and whatever, true, false, whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I only see a complete involvement of everyone in saying that this was something precious that had to be protected. I mean, this was, and how do we, if we can't, how do we bring back the value of it for our democracies? How does democracy survive if the most vulnerable citizens don't have a voice?
Right.
So we have to find a way. We don't have a space for injustice to be aired. We don't have any space for all those things that the media was supposed to do in a democracy. Then democracy doesn't survive. I'm not saying that only the media does that work. Other institutions do as well, but this is important.
Right. Talking of the marginalization of the powerless and the poor, I find it's a term that I'm just thinking of, celebritization of news, as it were. Everything is so celebrity driven now. Do you
Right.
think there is a way to reverse that trend at all, or we have just crossed the boundary and we don't know what to do now?
So again, that happened. This is also a part of this whole business, because you say everything has to be entertaining, everything has to be so entertaining, so you build stories around people, and then people become celebrities, and celebrities are actors, as if there are no other people of any worth, and then you trivialize everything. Actors have to talk about the budget, actors talk about everything, and it's a. I mean, what is bizarre is that all through this, people did not stop and see what's going on. There were no morchas, there was nothing for the complete dumbing down of
Right.
the Indian media. And so that's very telling. We wait till everything reaches a point of almost no return. Can you go back and celebrate? I think some fatigue is evident in the fact that people are starting to do things on the net, because you can do it without that much initial investment, but I don't really see that as a solution. It's nice to have those outlets, and unless people can find a way to use new technology in a way that's completely radical and wonderful, which might happen, which is something that I would really find wonderful, and use these same formats but subvert them for good.
Right.
But it needs imagination.
Since we're talking news as a sort of a source of profit, we are witnessing the Bombay police, the Mumbai police, investigating 3 channels about what they call TRP scandal.
Right.
It's bizarre. I find it very strange that we are going through times where the police have to look at television channels rigging their ratings. So my
Right.
is not, I mean, I will come to that, but I have a slightly broader question. Do you think that what's happening is TRP driven, or there is also ideological prejudice that's at the back of it?
You mean this particular case of the police and the TRP ratings?
No, yeah, I'm thinking in terms of how some of these channels go completely berserk with what they say and do.
Right.
It has a certain ideological slant to it, at least
Right.
from
Right.
my vantage point.
Okay, it certainly does. But the reason why I keep saying things the way I do, which seems very abstract, is because you see, right now, yes, it's ideologically driven, but anyone can do it. You see, it's a symptom and not the cause.
Right.
We have weakened the media to such an extent. Around the kind of 1990s, for instance, we saw the people coming into the media, politicians, real estate people, builders, all kinds of people came in. Businessmen have always been there, and I'm not saying political ideologies have not driven newspapers before, but the extent, the first one, the media is huge now. It's enormous, and 80,000 print publications, some 800 television channels. So you have all these, you made the media so weak. It became something that could be used. Its power could be used in the name of profit, or in the name you rob the media of all the standards and all the ideals, at least, that defined it. So you had the entry of all these people. You had entry of all kinds of people. So now it's a free for all. Whoever has a little more power will control, and through corporates as well. But it's, as I said, it's a symptom.
Right.
Having weakened the media so much, now you cannot, politicians will kind of take it over. That's
Yeah.
exactly what's happening. But
Right.
I don't see how you can reverse it by, you can say, yes, this particular party or this thinking is driving it and that control. And sure, I mean, it's important to identify all that. But because I find people are just not understanding the cause of it all,
Right.
I prefer not to, leave that to
Yeah.
uh, people who can kind of look at news right now and what's going on in.
Yeah. I find it funnily ironic that increasingly you find people on Facebook and elsewhere nostalgically remembering the sedate old days of All India Radio and Doordarshan ladies delivering
Right,
news in a very anodyne, humdrum sort of way, and they feel good that this is what we want. But I don't
right.
realize that that was another form of
Yeah.
control that was at play, which is fine. I mean,
Um,
all the governments control their state media. That's beside the point. But my larger point is that people are really beginning to hunger for news delivered straight, the way perhaps you and I are talking, for instance.
Right, right. No, of course I remember those days where an anchor fly would go and sit on an anchor's cheek, and I mean it was all so simple and basic.
Right.
Yeah, so I think people are missing that, and I think what they're also missing is the kind of common sense of, at least occasionally, when people discuss issues. I mean, look at it today, for instance. Why is it a given that you're 24 hours of a television channel? And if, let's say, there's a dispute between China and India, for instance, watching the news, you will be no wiser, not only about what happened just now, but you'll be no wiser. There'll be no perspective. There'll be nothing said that those 24 hours deserve.
Right.
And I think yet in half an hour, we would have got more out of an older era. But yes, but I do think that there was that control. And today we have, funnily enough, through all our many channels and freedom, etc., and marketization, we have arrived at control again.
Right, right. Let's talk a bit about you mentioned 24/7 news cycles. I find it absurd, even living here in America on CNN, for instance. Every 2 minutes there used to be breaking news, and breaking news used to be absolute nonsense that they used to spout. They still do. Why are we stuck in this cycle where news channels think that they have to deliver news all the time? There are times that this is not happening.
That's exactly what I'm pointing out. This is how advertising has changed us.
Okay.
That's what news, that's exactly what I'm saying. News producers are doing this without even knowing why they're doing it. They have to keep a level of excitement all the time. They're trying to make you addicted. And that addiction is exactly how, it's like, how do you buy? Why should you buy? I mean, what was advertising trying to do? Show you a nice lifestyle, make you feel like if you bought that soap or whatever, you could buy into that lifestyle. Then now techniques are more sophisticated, and they kind of more and more what they try and do with advertising is try and get into your mind, get into your heart, or, whatever. News is doing the same thing. So when it keeps trying to excite you, when it keeps trying to, keep you on it, and what is it? As you say, it's rubbish. And the reason why it has to be rubbish, the reason why it can't be, it might be a serious announcement of something, and then it will not, as I said, build with perspective or build with, more. The reason why it won't do that is it has to keep you at that level of very superficial addiction.
Right. Right.
It doesn't want you to think. It wants to keep you kind of just, mentally occupied with it, preoccupied with it.
Yeah. We are all pumped up all the time.
Exactly.
And social media is not helping in the sense journalists in America, I'm sure it's true in India equally, feel compelled to say something or the other on their Twitter handle all the time. At 3 o'clock in the morning, some inane stuff is churned out because their media company is expecting them to be active.
It's not just journalists. We all are marketers now. We're all marketing
True.
ourselves, you know?
Yeah. Now, so how do we pipe down from that state of mind? Is it even possible anymore, given the preponderance of social media?
I mean, I have to think like, compare it to say any other kind of addiction. Let's suppose, you're a cigarette smoker and you've been kind of pumped with cigarettes so much and you want to stop. Can you? I mean, it's a hard thing, first of all. Secondly, it can, might lead to another addiction just to get over that addiction. So we've reached a state which is really serious, and I don't think people are understanding what kind of serious social evil this has become now. And I'm not. I don't want to say the media has become a social evil. What we have allowed to happen to our media is a social evil. So I don't know if it can be reversed. We can try, and if people do start sobering up and trying to kind of reverse, it's a start, and that would be good. But we need to do other things as well. We can't just rely on that.
Right.
I think using technology in different ways, maybe looking at laws. Certainly, advertisers need to. This conversation cannot be had without the advertiser, and nowhere is the advertiser being brought in. Nowhere.
Right.
It's all about news anchors. It's all about how to be rein in. The politicians are discussing it. Lawyers are discussing it. Corporate houses are pulling out their ads, but the advertiser is not taking responsibility.
Right. To change the gears a bit, it's always appeared to me that the news channels in India, especially Hindi and English, have been punching so much far above their weight. If you look at in terms of the consumption of news, as our common friend Amit Khanna pointed out the other day, about barely 10% of India watches news, and of which only about 2.5% watch English and Hindi news. If that's the kind of quantum we are talking about, why are these channels so powerful? Why are they shaping public opinion to the extent they do?
It's not so little. I mean, in terms of the whole.
Yeah, but I suppose you can factor in amplification that happens on various social media.
No. Is Amit saying that if you break down channel viewership and look at each channel's viewership, I would put it slightly differently.
Okay.
If you look at most of India is covered by cable television, right? So everyone is getting some form of at least one, they're watching some news channel or the other. Is that right? I mean, I don't know if I'm refuting what he's saying.
No, but I'm particular aspect from a piece that he wrote where he says barely 10% of India watches news and of them only 2.5% watch English and Hindi news. It's something that the media does not want to talk about, apparently.
Only 10% watches news across the country.
That's what that's what he says in his piece.
I'm very surprised by that figure. I'm very surprised. I would need to look at it. I'm very surprised. But let's assume it's 10%. 10% of 1.3 billion.
Yeah.
Which is a substantial number. Just assuming that is the
right.
And you can't break up channels because all the channels are doing the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, if you were to say X channel has only so much viewership and Y channel has this, that doesn't hold because The formula is the same across the board. Even if there are minor variations, that some are maybe slightly more responsible, some are slightly, that
Right.
will be there. But the format is the same. You don't have, where do you have serious investigations? What is journalism? I mean, as a journalist, what did you do for the whole paper? You might have had a bit of entertainment news, a bit of glamour, but the rest you were doing stories, right?
Right.
Now, you have television is not doing journalism. In fact, you actually see, I put it in my book, senior news editor saying, oh, well, we can't do news anymore. I don't see us doing news anymore. So then what are you doing? You're a news channel. And you have a lot of money. You have studios. You can't send out a journalist for a story.
No,
What is going on?
but that's
So then
work.
what?
That's
Sorry?
all. It's actual work, which a lot of people don't want to do. They just want to
I
fathom.
don't think it's actual. It's not work. It's not that. How much does it cost to hire a team? No. I'm just saying it's an absurd thing. It's like my thing. I make cars, but it's too expensive for me to make cars anymore. Or it just doesn't make sense.
It
It's
does.
silly thing itself. But nobody's questioning it. And
Right.
I'm saying the reason why people are saying it again is because now we have a format where we do what the advertiser wants. And I'm not saying the advertiser sits over there and says, now do this.
Mhm.
There's an environment, an ecology created within which all this happens. And so, coming back to your point about very small viewership, I'm very surprised. I would not have thought it was so low. 10%, I'm very, very
In
surprised.
fact, I have that piece in front. I'll just read three, four
Okay,
minutes from that.
sure.
This is in Open Magazine. He says, in the last decade, journalism has not only been partisan, but also irresponsible and shoddy, which is fine, understand. In no other country, there are 300 plus news channels in over 20 languages. India watches news, sorry. However, a reality never mentioned by the newspaper is that less than 10% of India watches news. If we narrow it down further to English and Hindi, the figure will come down to about 2.5%. That,
Okay, let me grant because I trust Amit Khanna's figures.
that's why.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I see, I still want to say it still bears out my argument. Why do you have all these news channels?
right.
They're not running them for any purpose that seems to be direct, right?
Yeah.
And then they still become a fight for that advertising. They still become competition. The whole economics of the media make no sense. I mean, in a sense, or rather, they have to be taken into account when you're looking at why news is what it is. That's one point. Two, given the influence or the power that you're talking about, if it's 10% or say come down, but not 2.5, because I'd say all 10%. Regional media is important. Why should we only talk about English and Hindi? You could say that that's still a huge figure in India that will still have it's the influential, the kind of, if you have to take a sort of, what pushes of
Mhm.
in terms of policy making and things like that. It's not something negligible at all. But I think my argument goes on and on about the ecology and the environment within all this happening.
Right.
It's not so much the actual news, the actual, I think, in fact, that is the red herring.
Right. Uh, Again, to move a bit away from this rather broad, lofty themes, I am constantly struck by when I barely look at Indian news channels at all, but whenever I do with little clips, what strikes me is one, the so-called journalists with flashing their microphones, they look so woefully uninformed, but so completely self-assured about what they're doing. How do you think
Right.
that's affecting the way the kind of absolutely sometimes destructive content that's being produced?
I don't think that there is an aim for productive content, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
I understand, but they still,
In that details,
yeah,
it's not. I mean, this is even like say a country like America, which has been far ahead in terms of television as a medium and far more sophisticated, etc. There's always been this increasing that when television came into the picture, Then you started having how people looked, how journalists looked was important, and you kind of started seeing a shift in, and that's been a long-standing and a long-ranging, very old controversy coming to us
Right.
from the US. So that is like the first and most obvious kind of thing, that the glamour quotient becomes important. But I think that the question you're asking about whether they, because they're uninformed, no, but the thing is, there's no, well, the television producers could hire people who are more informed or insist that they be more informed. That aim is not there. The aim is to ask that question, to repeat it again and again and again. To, as I said, you're 24 hours and you do not inform the viewer beyond that very tiny kind of level. Why is that?
True.
The
Yeah.
aim is not. The aim is not to actually inform you beyond. The aim is to keep you at a level of ignorance, or well, not ignorance, but
Yeah. News is more like IPL match now, and that's the sense.
exactly, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Every ball has to be outside the stadium, right? Otherwise, you're not breaking anything.
Exactly. That's a very, very good way of putting it. That's exactly right.
Again, to jump a bit, I'm not getting into all the insane details of the Sushant Singh Rajput case. We reported in a substantive way a little bit with our person in Delhi, Shantanu Goare. But my point is about, how do you personally look at a thing like that now that the All India Institute of Medical Science and the CBI both are saying that it doesn't seem like a case of murder at all, it is suicide. And suddenly, all the screamers who were going on and on asking for drugs on television channel have just gone quiet.
I don't know. I mean, it's like I can't answer, because everything is just an episode in this long saga. It's not by itself. It to me means nothing. It's just one more instance, it's one more. Let's say the next part of the show. To me, we're not going to see any change. These details, to me, are at least as a sort of someone looking at the larger picture,
Right.
don't mean very much,
But yeah, occasionally I have to bring you down to that level.
I know. In fact, everyone who does, every journalist, practicing journalist right now, I know.
Let me, continuing a little bit in that vein, let me ask you another one. How much do you think broadcast media is responsible for the press having earned that horrible sobriquet, prostitute?
I think the press has earned it all by itself, to some extent. I mean, we started just before liberalization, you could see the shift so clearly happening, like the late 80s, 1980s. And then starting from then liberalization, and then you start seeing the kind of shift happening in newspapers, the difficulty of doing any kind of stories that affected people who were not of the consuming class. You started seeing products being pushed. You started seeing these pages and pages of parties. Again, let me keep stressing that I'm not against entertainment or glamour. I don't say that it has no space. I mean, I edited Elle magazine, so I have no problem with fashion or glamour and things like that. But each thing has its place and its proportion. Why was this total disproportion, this total distortion? Do you remember the kind of pages of suddenly the fashion industry, which is a minuscule, in terms of economic figures, its turnover is kind of so tiny. Every day, pages and pages in the newspapers, and then that goes, and then something else happens. So I think that and newspapers, don't you think they were realizing what they were doing? It was like a flow, and people were just going on without saying why is this happening, and all kinds of things were happening, ideologically driven, or whether it was profit driven. But as I said, once you weaken the structure, everything that happens then is bound to happen almost.
Right. To conclude, let me ask you, you've already addressed it earlier, but I would still want you to address it a little bit more. How do you think the media can extricate itself from this absolute morass that it finds itself in? Is there a way out, you think?
Well, first of all, whether there's a way out or not, if we want to do something, then I would say that the very first thing would be for journalists to educate themselves about what's happened. I mean, that's really important, and how it happened. And then to educate others, educate the public. I mean, to start a movement for protecting the free media. By that, I just mean the idea of the media in a democracy. And I think then that lawyers, politicians, all those people who want to rein in the media and the corporate community should be brought in to discuss how they have contributed. It can't be media is bad and let's bring it down. Let's bring down the journalists' conversation. So I think first of all there has to be a sort of awareness of what happened, why it happened, and an acknowledgement that this is something we want to protect.
Right.
And I think this is not something that's controversial in the sense that it's not like people have to spend money for it or anything has to be done. It's just something that is a perspective that has to be brought in. And I think citizens have to be brought into this conversation as participants in protecting the media, a good media, but not let's punish this, because there's no end to that.
Right.
Someone says we'll punish this by withdrawing ads, and someone else will say, "Oh, I'll punish that newspaper for." It will go on. That's not the solution.
Right. Yeah. Before I let you go, what's your next book?
Oh, my next book is it's a kind of personal exploration into sort of history. I tracked my great grandfather's journey to South Africa 100 years ago.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I've seen bits of that you refer to in your Facebook in there. How far is it now?
Well, I keep rewriting, so I don't know, but hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
Okay. Now we look forward to that. And
okay.